Welcome to Ancient Words, Modern World, where we explore timeless texts for modern wisdom. I'm your host, Melody.
Melody, I was thinking about how certain stories seem to be encoded in our cultural DNA. They're so foundational that we reference them without even realizing it. Phrases like, the salt of the earth, or an eye for an eye. We use them, politicians quote them, movies play on them.
Exactly. And I think for a lot of people, the Bible can feel, well, intimidating. It's ancient, it's complex, and sometimes it feels disconnected from our 21st century reality of emails, traffic, and social media feeds.
And I'm Alec. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a fascinating point, Melody. It's almost as if this ancient text is a secret blueprint for our own society. We're living in a house that it helped build, but we've lost the architectural plans.
A perfect analogy. And today, we're diving into one of the most foundational of those blueprints, the Gospel of Matthew. For anyone feeling a bit lost in the noise of modern life, this ancient text offers a surprisingly practical compass.
It really is. Matthew seems particularly concerned with ethics, with how we treat one another, and how we live as a community. And there's no better example of that than the section that scholars call the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7.
The Sermon on the Mount. It's probably the most famous collection of teachings in history. It kicks off with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What does that even mean in our culture, which values wealth and confidence?
That's such a great question. It's not about being materially poor. Poor in spirit is about humility. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we aren't self-sufficient. It's the posture of being open, teachable, and aware of our need for grace, for something bigger than ourselves.
Right. It's the opposite of arrogance. It's the starting point for any real growth, isn't it? Admitting you don't know everything.
Precisely. And from there, he moves into these incredible metaphors. He tells the crowd, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world.
I love that imagery. Salt preserves and adds flavor. Light dispels darkness. It's a call to be a positive, transformative presence wherever we are, in our families, our workplaces, even on the internet.
Especially on the internet. In an environment that can be so toxic and divisive, what does it mean to be salt and light? It means bringing nuance, kindness, and truth. It means refusing to engage in the outrage cycle and instead choosing to build up and illuminate.
That makes sense. It's a call to action. But then you get to the really challenging parts, like turn the other cheek. How do we apply that without becoming doormats or allowing injustice to flourish?
It's a profound teaching on non-retaliation. It's not about passivity. It's about breaking the cycle of violence and revenge. When someone strikes you, the instinct is to strike back, escalating the conflict. Turning the other cheek is a radical, disarming act. It says, I will not participate in your cycle of hate. I will not be defined by your aggression.
So it's a form of powerful, non-violent resistance. It's about retaining your own humanity and dignity in the face of dehumanizing behavior.
And that connects to another theme that's woven all through Matthew, something that's maybe even harder than non-retaliation, forgiveness. It's one thing not to hit back, but it's another thing entirely to truly forgive.
You're right. And it's stated so directly in the Lord's Prayer, which Matthew gives us. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. It's not just a request, it's a condition. The measure we use for others is the measure used for us. It's a profound and frankly terrifying link between the grace we receive and the grace we're willing to give.
That reciprocity is so challenging because holding on to a grievance can feel powerful, almost righteous. But Matthew presents it as a trap. To really drive the point home, Jesus tells the parable of the unforgiving servant.
Right. The man who is forgiven an unpayable billion-dollar debt by his king, but then goes and throttles a fellow servant who owes him a few bucks. The imagery is almost darkly comedic. It's so extreme. The point is impossible to miss. How can we, who have been forgiven so much, dare to withhold forgiveness from others?
And the consequence for the unforgiving servant is chilling. The king hands him over to be tortured. In our world, that torture isn't a literal dungeon. It's the prison of bitterness we build for ourselves. Holding on to anger, replaying the tape of how we were wronged. That's a kind of self-imposed torture. It eats away at our peace and joy.
Exactly. It's choosing a higher path. The Sermon on the Mount consistently calls us to move beyond base instincts and legalistic rule-following toward a radical ethic of love and integrity.
And Matthew doesn't just present these teachings as a list of rules. He weaves them into the narrative and illustrates them through another key feature of the gospel, the parables.
The parables. Jesus was a master storyteller. He used these simple, earthly stories to explain profound heavenly truths. One of the most famous in Matthew is the parable of the sower.
Right, where a farmer throws seed and it lands on 4 different types of soil: the hard path, the rocky ground, the thorny soil, and the good soil. And the seed represents the message of the kingdom.
This parable feels incredibly relevant for our age of information overload. We are constantly being bombarded with seeds, messages, ideas, notifications, demands on our attention. The question the parable asks is, what kind of soil is your heart and mind?
That's so true. I think many of us can relate to the thorny soil. Jesus says that's the one who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. That feels like a diagnosis of modern anxiety.
It really does. We're so distracted by worries about our career, our finances, our social standing, that the seeds of truth and purpose can't take root. The parable is an invitation to do some gardening, to clear out the weeds of distraction and cultivate a receptive heart.
Another parable that always hits home for me from Matthew is the parable of the talents, where the master gives 3 servants different amounts of money, or talents, and expects them to do something with it.
A powerful story about stewardship. And it's crucial to understand that talents here aren't just about money or even just our natural abilities. It's about everything we've been given: our time, our resources, our relationships, our opportunities.
Exactly. The 2 servants who invest and multiply what they were given are praised, but the one who was afraid, who just buried his talent in the ground to keep it safe, he's condemned.
The message is that faith isn't a passive, safekeeping activity. It's an active, risk-taking venture. We are called to use what we have for a greater purpose, not to hide it away out of fear of failure.
It's a huge challenge to the temptation to play it safe in life, to just maintain the status quo. Matthew is telling us, through this parable, that we are meant to grow, to create, to contribute.
Which brings us to the very end of the gospel. After all the teachings, the healings, the conflict, and the resurrection, Matthew concludes with what's known as the Great Commission.
This can be another intimidating part for people. Jesus tells his followers, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations." For some, that conjures up images of aggressive street corner preaching or unwelcome door knocking.
Right. But if we read it in the context of the entire book, I think we see a different picture. Making a disciple simply means teaching someone the way of Jesus, the way of the Sermon on the Mount, the way of love, mercy, and justice.
So it's less about verbal proclamation and more about living a life that embodies these teachings. It's about how you handle conflict, how you treat the marginalized, how you steward your resources. Your life becomes the lesson.
That's the heart of it. The Great Commission is a call to create a community of people who are trying to live this way. It's an invitation, not a coercion. It's saying, here is a way to live that brings profound meaning, peace, and purpose. Come and see.
So, as we wrap up, it feels like the Gospel of Matthew isn't just a story about Jesus. It's a blueprint for how to live a truly human life. It tackles the big questions. How should we treat each other? What do we do with what we've been given? How do we find our purpose?
It's a challenging blueprint, to be sure. It calls us to a higher standard than our culture often does. But it's also filled with grace and hope, ending with the promise from Jesus, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age."
A beautiful promise to end on. If you've been listening and are curious, our encouragement to you is simple. Pick it up and read. You don't have to read it all at once. Maybe just start with Matthew chapter 5, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and see what speaks to you.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We hope it's given you a new lens through which to see this incredible book.
Until next time, this has been Ancient Words, Modern World.